Are we? All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jacob Smith. For those of you that were with us yesterday, this week is about talking to veterans of different eras concerning what their experiences and thoughts were of the military before, during, and after they got out. Yesterday we spoke with veteran Daniel Lovell. He talked about his experiences in the United States Air Force in the 1950s. Today we got three veterans from the Vietnam War, and we kind of found out as we were sitting up here a couple minutes ago. William Brokop, Snoopy, is what so if you hear me say Snoopy, that's who I'm talking about. I never call him anything other than Snoopy. So
that's a long story. We don't have time.
Yeah. This is Steve, resident here at Lakeside.
I'm here at Hotel Lakeside for a couple days.
A couple days, okay. Well, he's here enjoying, and then we got Tom with us, who is also a Vietnam veteran. So how this works out is time in Vietnam goes 1968 to 69, 1969 to 70, and 1970 to 71. So we kind of have a interesting time period in American history. So for those of you, again, that were here yesterday, you're going to hear a lot of the same questions that I asked yesterday. So what we're supposed to get out of this is how different generations generally respond to the same questions to kind of get the ideas of where, what their perspectives were and veterans' perspectives over time. Tomorrow is going to be what we call modern, what I'm terming modern veterans, which is essentially post 9/11 through today. And Friday will be Gold Stars / veterans that served in the 1980s and 90s. It's just kind of how it had to work out like that. So with that being said, gentlemen, what I think we're going to do is I'll just kind of ask the initial questions, and we'll just go right down and kind of answer it, and then we'll get into more of a discussion-based conversation, if that's okay. I was wondering, and we'll start with Snoopy here. Tell me a little bit, in a couple minutes, what your background was. Why do you have family that served in the military? Why did you, or did you decide to raise your hand, or did Uncle Sam decide for you?
He helped.
He helped?
Yeah. Well, prior to that, I was pretty much parochial high schools all the way through school. Went for a year to Cuyahoga Community College.
Keep talking.
And things didn't work out real well there. I got kind of disillusioned with the establishment. I thought, I'm going to work for a year and whatever happens, happens. Well, I was going to go back to school the following September, which would have been 1967. July, I got the letter. I was one of Lyndon Johnson's boys. I tell everybody I was a first-round draft pick. July, I got the letter. August, I got the physical. And September, I was at Fort Knox. Most of you are probably the age that you might remember in 1967, they dropped a bunch of skydivers in the lake outside of Huron. Anybody remember that? Okay, well, I knew all those guys. And the one that we found 5 days later was the guy that nicknamed me Snoopy, so that stuck. Wednesday of that week, I got my draft notice. I came home from work, it was sitting on the table. Mom says, that came for you today. I open it up. She says, what are you going to do? I said, well, Canada's too cold, and I hear Leavenworth ain't a nice place, so I guess I'm going to the Army, Mom. So my third day in the reception center, I volunteered for jump school to be a paratrooper in memory of the guy that gave me that nickname. That was all the way through my records in basic and infantry school. Infantry school was 13 weeks. The 10th week, the 10 offensive hit. And I cussed General Japp, who designed that offensive, every time I hear his name, because they canceled our jump school orders and shipped us right to Nam. I get to Vietnam, and we have a big formation. They said the following named personnel would go to the 82nd Airborne Division, and the first name they call out is mine. So I get up to the sergeant. I said, Sergeant, I never jumped out of a plane in my life. He said, you'll learn, son. Keep moving. You're hoping up the war. So I wound up as an infantryman with the 82nd Airborne Division. A lot of the guys the same age. Johnson got us all back then. When I was there was over 500,000 of us there. landing in country, it stunk. Walking around country, it was hot, humid. Humidity was always 90% or above. For about 5 years when I got back home, I never ate rice because they saw how they grew it. You might not want to look at that because if you eat rice now, you won't want to anymore. Do I need to go any further? Or you got
No,
another
I think
question?
that's good. Do you want to talk, Steve?
Well, I've got a long family history of service in the services. My grandfather in World War I, my father, who's still living, is a World War II veteran. I ended up going into the Air Force. My brother went to the Air Force. I have a son-in-law that retired from the Air Force, so we got a long history of service. But I did my freshman year at Wilmington College, and in the summer, I got my letter, and I went down. I said, Canada's too cold. And I said, well, you know what? I wonder if the Air Force will take me, because they only took volunteers.
Yeah.
So I went down to the Air Force, and they said, sure, we'll take you. Just sign here. So I signed and got the Air Force. I traded 2 years of service for 4 years of service in the Air Force, and they said, you're going to be whatever you want to be. And I got into finish my basic training, and they said, what you want to be is you want to build bombs and hang them on airplanes. There's only one place they were using that stuff, and I knew I was destined to go there. I had married my wife right after tech school, and we made our first assignment was in Luke Air Force Base, Phoenix, Arizona. Hot, dry, but there were a lot of folks coming back from Vietnam who were stationed there, and they said, when the assignments came down, they said, Tui Wall Air Force Base, they said, go there, take that assignment, because it is one of the safest bases in Vietnam. They've got Korean Marines all around that base.
Oh.
They are tough fellas. You're the safest place in Vietnam. I got there, the Korean Marines were pulled out. So things got interesting after that.
Yeah, go.
Can I go?
Oh, no.
That's fine.
Okay.
I got a funny story, but we'll wait.
Okay, go ahead.
I graduated in 1967 from Lorraine Senior High School, no longer there. And the way the family folklore is, I had a three-quarter ride scholarship to the University of Maryland to be a place kicker. Well, the coach of Maryland, a guy named Tom Nugent, got fired, and the new guy that they brought in didn't want to give any help to a place kicker. So I had an uncle who was involved in football his entire life. He says, how about Georgetown University? Maybe we can get you in there. I said, oh my God, Georgetown, don't you have to be really, really smart, Unc? You see, I was in the lower third of my graduating class. And he said, well, you go there to summer school take 2 subjects, you get a B in both of them, you are in, I will see to it. Well, we got this lick because in high school, I hated to carry the books, let alone actually open them up. So I was getting ready to go. All of a sudden, the Board of Regents, they must have had it in for me because they said effective immediately, we are dropping football from our available sports activities. So now we're into August. There's no scholarships, nothing out there anymore. So I said, you know, I'm going to beat the draft twice and also avoid going to Vietnam by joining something called the Army Security Agency. Ask anybody. Army Security Agency is non-combatant. You'll be safe. I said, okay, now we got it made. So into the Army I went. And after I finished with my secondary training, lo and behold, orders came down for Vietnam. This was February of 1968. Our group of special communications people were going to be there 10 days before the Tet Offensive. Well, one of the captains in our training brigade challenged the other training brigade to a football game. And I said, oh, right up my alley, count me in. I sprained my ankle. I said, this is no problem at all, man. In high school, you soaked it, wrapped it, a week later, you're playing again. Well, it's not that way in the Army. They require you to go into a cast for 6 weeks. No ifs, ands, or buts. So my buddy shipped out, and I had to just stay on medical detention there until it was healed up. I went to the office, the Army Security Agency office that they had in Fort Gordon, Georgia, and I said, okay, I'm ready to go. Come on, get me to my buddies. He pulls out the slip and he says, well, you're not going. I said, what are you talking about, man? I got to get there. My friends are all there. He said, nope, you're going to Ethiopia, Asmara, Ethiopia. I said, oh boy. So I figure, well, 18 months there, sooner or later, NOM's going to get me unless I can get Fort Meade, Maryland. When I was done with Ethiopia, it caught up to me because I wasn't going to Fort Meade, Maryland. There's Army regulation that says you've got to be on your stateside duty for 90 days. On the 88th day of that small duty station, you were given orders to Vietnam, so there it was. That pretty well sums up the start and how I ended up in both East Africa and in Vietnam.
When you all got over to Vietnam, are there any specific missions or anything that you did that kind of sticks out in your minds about something maybe you didn't think you'd have to do, but you did, as far as patrols go or missions in general?
Well, I guess I'm the only one that had to do missions. Our basic mission was pretty much search and destroy. Our job was to go find the enemy and get rid of him. The flip side of that, we had our medical crew, which it seems you never heard about back in the States. We called medcap teams. We went into villages, and if people were sick or hurt, or sometimes we'd be on patrol, and a mom would come out with a little boy that had a cut on his foot. And I've got a picture of our medic taking care of a little kid that was like that. Our engineer units built hospitals, they built schools. Of course, as soon as they got them done, it seemed like the VC came in and blew them up or tore them down. But basically, our mission when I was there was to find the enemy and get him out of there, which didn't make a whole lot of sense to us because, I don't know if you've seen the movie Hamburger Hill, that was a 10-day operation with the 101st Airborne Division and the 1st Cav, and it took them 10 days to take that hill. And 3 months after they took that hill, they left it, and the North Vietnamese moved right back in. So we were kind of demoralized from all that stuff. But basically, find them, get rid of them, find their equipment, get rid of them. Semi-funny story. One of our guys was a machine gunner up near, but not in, the Ashaw Valley. And machine gunner carried a 45 as a sidearm because he didn't walk around with that 26-pound machine gun all the time. And it was morning, and he had to go do his morning constitutional, so he went out and found a place and got an entrenching tool, made a little spot, squatted to do his business, and he caught a glimpse of something shiny to the right of him. And he thought, well, this sucks. I'm going to get sucked taking a dump in the morning. And nothing happened. He pulled his pants up, pulled his 45 out, fired into the spot where he saw that, and hollered, NBA, NBA. The rest of the company came up there, and his name was Tommy McCann. He went down into the tunnel that guy was popping up from and found a 3-level complex. I think the farthest one was about 50 feet down. There was a bamboo woven floor mat in the hospital area with beds, bicycle power generators, ceiling fans. We pulled out 350 brand new Chinese and Russian rifles that were still wrapped in cosmoline, never got to be used to shoot against an American soldier. We got those all recorded. Everybody took one home as a souvenir. 15 tons of rice. And I'm not sure how much ammo was in there, but when we called in for an airstrike. The third pass with that Phantom Raider, the side of the hill went away. So I guess you would call it an ironic, funny story. The guy thought he was going to get killed going to the bathroom, and we found the biggest weapons cache at that time in South Vietnam.
Our
Go
mission,
ahead. Yeah.
our mission was to support when they called for that airstrike. It might have been our Phantoms that came in and
Could have been.
dropped those 500-pounders or those into that hill. So that was our mission. One of the things for the Air Force guys is that it's a lot of boredom until there's excitement. You know, you're doing basically a job, the same job every day. You're moving ammo around, you're fusing weapons, you're putting them on airplanes. A lot of boredom, a lot of work. So I would volunteer with different things. I'd do sports. I was a softball umpire, and I also volunteered at the hospital where dust off, the helicopter pilots, the teams that would go in and bring in injured soldiers to get them into a hospital right now.
Yeah.
I think that's the start of today's care flights, right? And I would volunteer as a litter carrier down there. And I have to tell you, a lot of the guys that came in there that was an experience I wish I'd never had, but I'm glad I had. A lot of brave people came through that hospital. So,
Hey, Tom,
Yes.
you told me a story about the signal to with the POWs.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a tremendous
Yeah,
story.
that was him. Thank you.
Yeah.
Has anyone ever heard of the village of San Tay? It did make headlines. Yeah, my daughter, because I told it to her 16 million times. San Tay was a POW camp where American POWs were held. It was in North Vietnam. I believe it was about 30 miles west of Hanoi. And we had kept intelligence records on it throughout most of the war, and we decided to make an effort to try to get them. And there was going to be the raid, which they trained for in Florida, and it was a bunch of Green Berets, Air Force pilots, because there were going to be support bombings around the area to keep reinforcements from coming. And they went in with helicopters, and they secured the whole place. Now, at this point, my CO told me that on a certain date, you need to be here in this comm center. There's going to be something that's going to come through. You are to read it only to make sure that it is very clear, no misspellings or anything. And then you are to relay it on. Now, I kind of had heard about this being done. This is the first time they ever approached me about it. And also they said, you keep your mouth shut. Okay, fine. So that night, I went to that comm center unit area, and sure enough, bells and whistles started going off through the entire place. What is happening is the entire military-oriented communications section worldwide is frozen because a very special, short, brief message is coming through. And that's what happened, and I'm there, and I'm reading it, and it says, San Tay secured, seeking POWs, cages empty. It was disappointing. The North Vietnamese moved them sometime shortly before this mission was instigated, but it was still my duty to take that and put it on a transmission unit and send it on. And it eventually ends up at the White House, and it was called DERNZA, which is Director, National Security Agency. And the disappointment that I felt when I read cages empty, it still gets me today. I said, wow. And they were so successful at it. One soldier got wounded, and that was it. Everything else went so smooth and so well. Another one of those messages came through some months later that wasn't as secure as Sante, but it was, again, very short, and it says, 1 million Chinese military personnel on border between North Vietnam, South Vietnam, or North Vietnam and China. And if you think back to your history of Korea, we were beating the heck out of the North Koreans until the Chinese came across that line, and we were in a world of hurt for a while. So you can well imagine that every one of us in that unit, after seeing that communique come through, we kind of had a lump in our throat for a while. It turned out in the long run, they did further investigations. China was actually threatening North Vietnam, but you know, at the moment, you wonder, you stop and think. Okay.
What, you've all mentioned some real trying times. And in combat, whether direct, indirect, or what have you, you have those moments where it's just kind of hard to get up in the morning and keep going. And what motivated you to say, okay, I gotta get up today, I gotta do this? How did you move forward when you heard things like this, or you saw the tragedies, or you were there when someone did not come back? I don't know, whoever wants to go first, feel free.
Well, pretty much you don't really have a choice. On the other hand, I've seen a lot of interviews with World War II vets, and their biggest thing was they wanted to do their job and definitely didn't want to let their buddies down. Anybody that's been there and been in a combat situation knows that after a while, there's a bond between you and everybody else that if you haven't been there, you can't explain it. I've got his back, he's got his back, he's got my back, and we've all got this guy's back. But you just want to do your job, not let anybody down, and know you don't like it, but it's got to be done. You're a family. It's a brother and sisterhood. Because the women were just as involved with a part of it, not as much as we were, but to save lives. I guess if I could add that, everybody asks us, what did we do? And a lot of people ignore the women. We had 18,000 women in the field that served there, 88% of which were nurses. And I met a nurse that had written a book, and I told her, I said, when we heard helicopters, we knew we were getting out of there. Somebody was going to get us out of a jam. When you heard choppers, you knew it was time to go to work. And she said, yeah, that's true. She says, when those birds came in, and like he was talking, those dust-off pilots, Joe Galloway from the Yadrang Valley did a thing on them, a tribute, and he said, we thought you were God's own lunatics and we loved you. Because whenever we called, they came. And when they brought the wounded in, her name was Mary, she said, the wounded were filthy. They stunk, they were full of swamp water and mud and muck, but all their wounds were dressed clean, and if they could be wrapped in plastic so they didn't get dirty. So here's a nurse that works in a surgical area 12, 18 hours a day, and the first thing she does is compliment the hospital corpsmen and medics out in the field. And the women deserve a lot of praise. We had, I have to tell, we had one nurse who was from Canton, Ohio, First Lieutenant Sharon Ann Lane, went over to volunteer to go to Vietnam, worked in the 312th Vac Hospital in Chu Lai, and when she first got there, she was in the intensive care unit, but she did a couple tours in the shifts rather, in the unit with the Vietnamese locals. We had old people, young people, kids, civilians that were wounded, and we took care of them just like we took care of the enemy if they were wounded. She was working the night shift June 9th, 1969, when they started taking mortars. I talked to a guy who helped carry her out. Her ward took a direct hit with a 122 millimeter rocket. She was in the process of covering the kids up in the beds with mattresses to try and protect them from the shrapnel from the mortars coming in. Killed her instantly. She received a Purple Heart naturally and a Bronze Star for her service. She's on the wall in D.C. with 7 other women, but she was the only one that was actually killed by the enemy, and she volunteered to do that. And it's time that more people heard about the women. And the nurse that wrote the book, she told me their #1 rule was, you never let a patient to see you cry. And I'm sure there was a lot of them that held the ice hand, thinking that she was his mom when he went away. Okay, next.
I had mentioned boredom, and what keeps you motivated is doing your job, knowing that if you don't do your job, somebody's going to die.
Probably.
At least, when you need those fast movers, you need them now. When I spent a month in supporting helicopter gunships in country, going from landing zone to LZ to LZ, handling rockets and the 7.62 rounds and the 50 cals and all that stuff. And if you don't do your job, everybody, from the guy pumping oil into the jet engines or into the tanks, everybody's got a job to do. And if you don't do it, you're putting somebody at risk. And that's really motivating.
Yeah. Tom?
Well, what motivated me whenever I felt like I was in some serious trouble or was I had a special admiration for that young guy named John Kennedy. He said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." And I just remember that. And I remember he was dynamic, and I mean, just about everybody in high school, probably throughout the whole nation, had a special feeling for that guy. And then, you're in school one day and the principal comes over the public address system and says, John Kennedy has been shot in Dallas. And then maybe 10 minutes later, he came back on and he said, "Sorry, John Kennedy is dead." And to this day, obviously it affects me. So that was an inspiration when I really needed it. I was reviewing some things. There was football and college were out of the question. So, that, plus I have a brother who did something very, very special. He's was a tomb guard at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Washington, D.C. So if you're a tomb guard, you are what they call a strack troop. Everything about you is damn near perfect. And what isn't, they finished it and they made you perfect. Those guys are special. I believe there's only been maybe 700 or 800 of them from the inception. And so I have that, and we went to see, actually we went to Washington, D.C. to pick up my brother when he was discharged, and he talked several of his buddies from the United States Army drill team to put on a show for my mom, dad, me, and his fiance in one of the parking lots at Fort Myer, Virginia. And wow, that was special too. So between John Kennedy and my brother, there was my inspiration, and I thought of them constantly, especially if I felt like something was starting to build up on me. They were my inspiration.
we're now about half hour into where we need to be, and what we've covered so far is early life, sort of why you went in and what you did while you were in. What's unique sort of about Vietnam veterans I have found is that the Vietnam veteran story certainly doesn't, the experience of being a veteran of that war does not end in 1975. A lot of people, when you look at other wars, the World War II veteran experience was much different in 1945, was much different at the end of the Civil War in 1865. You guys came home from fighting a hot war and started fighting a whole nother type of war to get the correct story out, to win over the American public, a lot of which didn't either gave you a, well, okay, welcome back, whatever, you know, to calling you names and everything else. And the motto of the Vietnam Veterans of America is never again will one generation leave another generation of veterans behind. And why we give a lot of credit to the World War II generation, and we should, no question, in my opinion, as a veteran long after you guys, where that World War II generation, and to a certain extent Korean generation, dropped the ball was in the care of making sure that the Vietnam veterans coming home were given the correct treatment and as to what they deserved. So what I'd like to go over with you guys is kind of give me your first impressions of going from soldier or airman back to the term Mr. Right? You're no longer a soldier or sailor. What was like the first couple years like? And what were your experiences when you first got home? So whoever wants to go first, feel free.
Well, I guess I was kind of lucky. I got back to California at 1 o'clock in the morning at Travis Air Force Base. They took us down to Oakland Replacement Center. We turned in all our gear. We got measured. They tailor-made a set of Class A's for us. We got a steak dinner. And then there was 3 other guys from my company. We went over to Oakland. We had plane tickets. So I got out at 9 o'clock the next morning. So coming in at 1 o'clock in the morning and leaving to come back to Cleveland at 9 in the morning worked out good for me because all the hippies were passed out or drunk. And we didn't hear too much about that. It was much later that the guys were told, don't wear your uniform going home. When I got home, family met me at the airport and everything was fine. My family was always very supportive. I didn't personally have any hassles. The only thing that ever happened to me that was confusing in that aspect was I was married then. My wife worked downtown. I went down to meet her for lunch. She worked out at a bank out on 9th Street. I come out of the terminal. I'm standing on the corner by the square waiting for the light, and a car backfired right to the curb. I get up rather sheepishly and dust my uniform off, and there's an Air Force captain standing there. And I said, "Good afternoon, sir." He said, "How long you been home, son?" I said, 3 days. He said, "You'll get used to it." So that was pretty much that. Later on, a few years down the road, I tried to join the VFW, and they said, "Come back when you guys are in a war." And
I think that happened more than
yeah. Time marches on, and those guys all went away. And I know a lot of guys that still have the same type story, and they won't join. And I tell them, "Hey, we run the show now. The kids are no longer the kids. We're the old men. So come on down." And I did get back in the VFW. I'm with 2 different honor guards with VFW and AMVETS. And that's worked out pretty good. I did have some trouble with some guys that I worked with. And I finally developed the attitude, if you weren't there, keep your mouth shut. And as far as the never again will a veteran be disparaged by another veteran, a buddy of mine and I were both in Washington, D.C. We're up by the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And there were 2 kids. One sergeant and one staff sergeant dressed blues walked up to us, and they saw our Vietnam vet hats, and they said, "Welcome home." We said, "Thanks." And they said, "Thanks for your service, and thanks for paving the way for us." buddy looked at me, he said, well, it was a long time ago, young feller. He said, that's not what I mean. He said, we know that you guys are the reason when we come back from the Mideast that we get the welcome home that we get, because you guys started that. I said, well, we like to think that. He said, it's true, we know it, tell your friends. So, as Jacob said, we're following right along with that. Never again will a veteran badmouth a veteran.
Steve?
There was one thing different about my homecoming, maybe than yours, is that I got home in June of 1970. May of 1970, we had the killings at Kent State. And the attitude toward the military in general took a real deep dive at that point. I wanted to get right back into school. My short hair, boy, you were isolated immediately. Number one, you were military. Number two, you were rotten because you just like to kill people. And the whole attitude really had a significant effect on me personally, in that I grew my hair long and I tried to look at the minimum military look that I could. Ended up, all the vets kind of gathered in one portion. I went to Wright State. One corner of the quad, the vets had joined to have lunch. And then that's always where you were sharing war stories. So it was a real harsh lesson, so much so that I hid my service for 30 years, maybe, or more. I worked with, and I'm not the only one, I worked with 8 fellas that were Vietnam veterans, and it was 10 years before we knew we had served. You just didn't say it, because when we got back, if you said it, things weren't really nice. So that was a real challenge. And when the Gulf War started, VVA were carrying on a number of events throughout the country where we were going that same route. We will not let this ever happen. No matter what our politicians do, those that serve because they serve the country, and they will do what the politicians say, but they should not be held accountable for what politicians do. That should never, ever happen again. The soldier does his duty because of his buddies, and it's his job. And they do it very, very well, and should never, ever be treated like that again.
Tom?
Yeah, basically, when we came home, we were told, shut up, sit in the corner, never happened. Well, it did happen, but it happened also to one man in particular. Maybe some of you know him. His name is Jan Scruggs. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial is there because of Jan Scruggs. And a lot more followed, So that was how we answered people telling us, sit in the corner, shut up, it never happened. It did. And yeah, all of us as Vietnam veterans should not be afraid to take a bit of credit for the welcome home that we helped make sure happened to anybody that's fought in the Middle East. God bless them all.
I'll tell you, as a veteran of the Iraq War, and working with veterans for the past 15 years, I have had the opportunity to talk to a bunch of different Vietnam veterans. Some still very, very bitter. Some that were bitter and now have been able to rise above that and contribute. The service organizations today function only because of the Vietnam veterans. The service organizations being Legion, DAV, VFW, those, I'm leaving some out, but you get where I'm going. There was a gap in and leadership in those organizations, because the Korean and World War II especially had, by and large, a distaste for the Vietnam veterans. And those service organizations have suffered because of that. So it's something that I understand as my generation, what those two guys told you, I get the benefits because of what they did, because of the war the Vietnam veterans fought when they got home. Not so much because of the war they fought in Vietnam, but the war they fought when they got home, which was a whole nother type of war. So from my generation to all of your generations, thank you. Thank you for that. And the big thing is mental health. The VA did not recognize mental health in the same way that they do today. And because of that, a lot of Vietnam veterans coped and self-medicated with drugs, with alcohol, and lost their lives in a certain way. And you got to remember, as there's a gap in generational leadership, if you have an individual who went to Vietnam, came home and did not get that mental health treatment, got married, had kids, may have abused his wife or abandoned his kids, that damage then is now passed on to the next generation. So, and those are the things that I'm seeing, I'm dealing with in my job quite a bit.
Can I make one more comment on that? That attitude, or they also impacted our families. Okay? My wife didn't like to hear that. My parents heard that criticism. It impacted our whole families. And God bless her. She was at the installation where they did the Vietnam Memorial, when it was, first opened. She went there. I couldn't. So she suffered as much or more than I did.
And war has an impact on families, obviously. I want to kind of move ahead to somewhat modern day. It's now been 50 years, or very close to 50 years, since the war officially ended in 75, but 55 for you. But how have you seen the nation change? Not from the moment you got there, but maybe over the past 20 to 30 years. Has the treatment gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Has it stayed the same? And I'm just not talking about the public. I'm talking about how you've seen attitudes in general evolve from the government. Do you feel that you have, your service is now appreciated more or less or about the same?
My service or the service, your service and those coming?
I'm talking for the Vietnam only.
Okay.
I'm not talking for mine. We'll get to that tomorrow.
Okay. Well, I'm watching my son-in-law in his service. There has been a significant change in their attitude toward their current servicemen. Maybe it's because I kept avoiding things, like I never talked to the VA, and so for me it's just been, I've kind of ignored it and just kept doing my own thing. So.
Snoop?
I only got involved with the VA because a friend of mine used to do a thing, driving a thing out of Huron County called the Caravan, going to nursing homes. I met her for lunch one day. She said, "What was the last time you had blood pressure checked?" And I said, "Last year, physical." So the nurse checked it, and it was off the chart. And then I found out that we had VA right in Lorraine at the hospital. I went over there, and that's when I got into VA. And then they started telling me about the different options I had to get compensation for disabilities that I didn't know existed. So I've been dealing with them for, 18 years. And it's helping out, because I got a pair of hearing aids, and I probably wouldn't hear these guys with the microphone without them.
Just to put that in perspective, when did you get out of the military?
I got out in '69, active duty.
And you've been dealing with the VA for 18 years?
Yeah.
Okay. the reason I want to stop for 1 second is to kind of show what he said and build on what he said. I got out in 2004, October 2004. I've been dealing with the VA since November 2004. So my service, 30 years later, and I have more time with the VA than a guy that served in Vietnam in 1968-69. That's what I want to show you. So just kind of put that in perspective.
Yeah, but we really didn't get a whole lot of information about it.
Right.
It was go home, find a job, that kind of thing. And that has since changed. And I don't know if we help, but I know this guy helps because I know a lot of guys that have been over there, including yours truly, that he's been a lot of help for as far as stuff goes like that. Now, him helping us is great. Not necessarily that the VA listens to him, because we've been trying to get some things fixed for me for a while that aren't going anywhere, but we're still working on it, and he hasn't stopped. So if he's not going to quit, I'm not going to quit.
And it's about getting everyone's back. But Tom, because Tom, why don't you tell him what you do, what your job is?
Oh, well, Mr. Jacob, no, he's not. Jacob is director of Lorain County Veteran Services Commission, and I am one of the drivers. I've been driving for 8.5 years, getting veterans to and from medical appointments, and God, in 8.5 years, I think my direct boss, Howard, told me once, he says, you've probably driven over 3,500 people in 8.5 years, to and from their appointments. And I thought to myself, wow, that's a lot of stories. And my daughter is involved in writing, and she's with us today here. And she said, Dad, you should take notes and maybe write a book about this. And I'm sorry that I never did that, but I did get a title real quick, and it's kind of unique because I would call the book Dear Life, because this is what those 3,500 riders that I've had over 8.5 years, this is what they're clinging to. And the VA, from what people tell me, for the most part, the VA has improved greatly over the years, greatly. We even, around 2020, there were news reports in southwestern United States. The VAs were letting veterans down. They were giving them appointments 6-8 months out because they couldn't cover them. It wasn't because of inefficiencies. And then a presidential proclamation came down that if we can't get these people in within a reasonable time, it is permissible to send them on the VA's dime to a private hospital to get help. That was one of the best things the VA did, because that truly showed that, yeah, the VA can care even more. Heartwarming story, but very true.
Well, I'm going to ask you guys a question. I'm going to tell a quick story because we got to start wrapping up. I want you guys to think about maybe a funny story that you had that's appropriate.
It's about time.
It's appropriate. But while you guys are thinking about that, I want to say this about VA healthcare. A couple things. April, May of 2022, I had a strep throat. It got into my lung cavity and totally collapsed my left lung. And it could have resulted in my death. I went to the Cleveland VA to get surgery, and I was in the hospital for about a week or so, and the doctor came in and he was wearing a Cleveland Clinic jacket. And I go, would you stop working for the Cleveland Clinic to come here? And he goes, no, on some days, he's a surgeon, so he works for the VA. On some days, he works for the clinic on the other days. So essentially, I had a Cleveland Clinic surgeon operating on my lung in a VA OR. So a lot, and when I say incestuous, that's always kind of used in a negative term, but it's the best term I can think of. It's very incestuous as far as where these surgeons go. So a VA surgeon, sometimes there are strictly just VA surgeons, but sometimes they're Cleveland Clinic, UH, what have you surgeons, University of Michigan, if I can say that here. I don't know. We got one over here. But what you need to understand is I had a veteran call me one time complaining about VA healthcare and how bad it was and how horrible it is, and our veterans don't deserve this. And I said, well, where did you find out about all this? And he goes, it's on the news. And I said, it is on the news, that's right. He goes, well, why'd you ask? And I said, well, because where did the news get it? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, I can tell you where the news gets it. He goes, where? I said, all of us as American citizens are shareholders in the VA. And therefore, the VA is responsible for telling us. So you can go online to the VA Inspector General website, and they will tell you everything they have found. And what Tom is talking about, the reason the press found out about that was because the VA told on itself. So all the reporter had to do was go online and go, well, I'll be. There's our story. That, I said, let me ask you this. Can you show me Cleveland Clinic's website that tells all the deficiencies they find? Not to pick on Cleveland Clinic or anybody else, or UH or any other hospital. Show me a private hospital that they put an Inspector General report out for everyone that has internet access to access and say, here's what we found wrong. You don't find it. And the fact that any organization run by an individual, there is no such perfect thing, right? And there aren't just bad nurses at one place and good nurses at another. It's the fact that you don't hear information about a private-owned hospital and you never hear anything goes wrong, that should at least set off a bell like, now wait a minute, you're telling me they've never, ever, ever made a mistake? The only time that stuff comes out is when things go massively wrong. So just something to think about, and it's just not VA healthcare, it's VA benefits and everything else. Now, with that being said, who wants to end on a high note first?
Here, sir.
Okay, there you go, say that.
When our units was out in the jungle or the paddies, whichever area we were in, we were usually out 3 to 5 weeks at a time. They would bring us back into a fire support base, which was not a big base. Usually had artillery batteries on it, a couple of helicopter pads, and we would get a break. My company had 4 platoons. One would pull perimeter guard, one would go on a recon, one would go out on ambush, one would get the night off. Then you rotate. Every couple months, they'd bring us back to one of the bigger bases, and we'd get what we call a 4-day stand down. We got a break, we didn't have to do anything. Sometimes they would helicopter in pellets of beer, even though it was only fall staff or Pabst Blue Ribbon.
You got beer?
Yeah. But it was warm.
Yeah, well, but you have beer.
Well, on occasion, yeah, we did. On occasion, I have to say, the guys back there would get the big canisters, the artillery rounds came in, throw some ice in there, a dozen cans of beer, some more ice, put the lid on, get a bunch of those, put them on a helicopter, go out and fly over the company and kick them out the door.
Yeah.
Of course, you had to wait a while before you opened it.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're sitting back there. One of the guys in my platoon just came back from R&R Bangkok, and he brought 2 bottles of Portuguese red wine. Davey Straza, who was our machine gunner, just got 2 boxes of Chef Boyardee spaghetti dinners from home. So we break out them, we pull the helmet liners out of the steel pots. 2 guys go up to the mess tent and steal 2 big loaves of French bread. Everybody had hot sauce and garlic salt in the rucksack to try and make the sea rations taste kind of like food. So here we sit out on the bunker. We did up the spaghetti and sauce in 2 steel pots. We're drinking Portuguese red wine with garlic bread and real live butter from the mess hall. The only thing we were missing was a violin player and a red Wanchicko tablecloth in the middle of one of the lowest countries in the world, stinking, and we're eating spaghetti dinner. We didn't have any candles either. Otherwise, the table was set.
Steve?
When I left for Vietnam, my wife was 7.5.
You better get this right.
7.5
She's right
months.
there.
7.5 months pregnant. So our daughter was born 6 weeks after I got in country. Well, communications were a little more challenging. Today, my son-in-law picks up a cell phone and calls home and does a FaceTime, right? Our communications was through shortwave radio, Mars station. And I would go down and wait for 4 hours until the communications, the environment, the atmospheric conditions were just right so that they could bounce shortwave radio waves from Vietnam to Guam to Hawaii to San Francisco, and then they'd call long distance to her. So I would wait 4 hours, I'd get the call, I'd call and I'd say, now one of the things you have to do is you have to say over so everybody can switch their switches, right?
Yep.
So I made contact with Lynn, I said, hello Lynn, this is Steve, over. And Lynn responded, over. So it took a little while to get over the and I found out that my daughter was 8.6 pounds and 21 inches. So that's right. But anyway, our communications were a little more challenging. That's a big improvement.
One more quick one.
Yeah, of course.
We had a guy in my company that was engaged to get married before he came over to Vietnam, and it didn't happen. He didn't have time. So he decides he's going to propose to her again. So we had a Mars station at Phu Bai, and there was, I don't know, 12, 14 of us in line waiting to make a call. And here's Jimmy up there, and he says, the door's open, you know. Will you marry me? Over. Yes, I will. Over. She said yes. Yay! So it wasn't all bad.
Tom, what you got for us?
Well, there was a guy that nobody really knew all that well, but his nickname was the Mixer. If you were fortunate enough on occasion to get either up or down to Saigon, to Tan Son Nhut Air Base, and it was a weekend, and in 1970, things were relatively calm in the Tan Son Nhut Air Base area. And they would have a party. Well, I happened to be in a group that got there once. They said, oh, this is going to be cool. So they pull out this gigantic, brand new tin garbage can, and they start dumping about 10 bottles of whatever liquor you want into that. And they get some ice. They usually stole ice from Air Force lockers. And they dumped that in there, and they topped it off with water. And somebody says, all right, go get the mixer. And it's like, what the hell's a mixer? All of a sudden, this gigantic guy came out around the corner, and, hey, we need it mixed. Not a problem. So he takes out a rag and he wipes his arm down right into that big garbage can, and he is mixing it up. And also, the most important ingredient was about 10 packets of grape Kool-Aid, and they called it Purple Jesus.
Purple Jesus. Because if you drink it, you will see Jesus.
You might.
Kool-Aid has not passed these lips since April of 1969.
Are there any, as we close, are there any other Vietnam vets or Arab vets in the audience today? What I'd like to do is if you guys can come up, we'll get a photo of all the Vietnam vets. And if you guys would like, just to make sure that everyone here gets the opportunity to welcome home the Vietnam vets, if you guys could come and shake their hands. Before we do that, John, we'll do some questions. We got one in the front down here. Oh, sorry, I didn't see her. Right there, the fellow, no, back there. Well, maybe I can hear what's your question, then I'll repeat it.
I did not go to Vietnam. I was drafted in '72, and to this day, you know, I feel awfully guilty that I didn't go. And I guess what I'm going to get at is, first of all, when you're drafted, you don't raise your hand. You take a step forward. If you don't take a step forward, you go to Fort Leavenworth, okay? So it's nice that volunteers, you know, raise their hand. Okay, but the real question for the Vietnam veterans is, I feel terribly guilty that I didn't go, but when you see something like Ken Burns' special on the Vietnam War, it did not capture what you guys gave us right now, the insights. Is there any movies or books that you could recommend to us that would capture the Vietnam War? Because you guys gave us more insight than Ken Burns' special did.
Bill,
Philip Caputo, he's a Chicagoan. But also go to Amazon and see the others they recommend, you know, because there's various viewpoints, for what it's worth.
Snoopy,
I'm Vietnam era, but I will not stand up with these guys. I mean,
Why?
I love them.
But you,
Wait, not to truck off. Don't feel guilty because you didn't go. The Army sent you where they wanted you to. And trust me, you didn't miss a thing. Did you raise your right hand and swear to defend the Constitution? Okay,
Yes.
you're good. And that oath still sits here. That oath never expires. Okay? But never feel guilty. It doesn't bother me that you didn't go. God bless you for not having to go. You didn't miss a thing.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I have met, and you know a couple of them, but I'm not going to share names, and you know who, Honor Flight guy, I don't want to say the name, you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
He went to his grave so, I get broken almost in a sense, that he, as a Marine, did not go to Vietnam. And it bothered him his whole life, and so much so that when he died, he was a part of an honor guard and color guard, two of them, ran one essentially.
Yeah.
And when he died, it kind of hurt everybody else because he was so loved and respected, but he did not want a flag folding ceremony at his
He did not want military honors.
And look, it's not that you did and others couldn't. It's like I said yesterday, it's you did and others wouldn't. You could have run away and said Canada's climate is just right. It takes a special breed of person. You don't have control over your life when you swear in. You have absolutely no control on where they send you. You have no control on when you were born or anything else. So if you put on the uniform and you served honorably, then you're welcome to the fraternity, so to speak. And I say that in gender-neutral terms.
But you're still part of the family.
Yeah.
and I can speak to exactly what you feel, even though I went to Vietnam. Okay? I didn't spend most of my life in the jungle. I was in a nice, safe air base. I didn't get shot at every day. I wasn't crawling through the muck. Took me 25 years before I felt like I even deserved to be recognized as a Vietnam veteran. And it took a fellow like Snoopy over here who's got 2 Purple Hearts that said, the hell you weren't there. The hell you didn't serve. So I appreciate, I felt guilty for a long time because I wasn't swimming through the muck and getting shot at every day. We all raised our hands. We all served just exactly what Uncle Sam wanted us to do.
And to a certain extent, your battles after the war, you guys were, you know, the names that they were being called to. You suffered through that as well. So might not have made it to Vietnam, but you suffered through the war at home, so to speak, too.
And like you said before, when that F4 Phantom 80 come over and dropped that 500-pounder, thank you so much. That's just somebody else I don't have to mess with.
In the back.
Yes, Snoopy, thank you so much for talking about the women that served. And you were talking about good books. There is a very new bestseller out right now by Kristen Hanna called The Women, talking about the women that served and what it was like when they came back.
Oh, wow.
They had even a worse receival than many of the guys
I
did.
can remember her last name. That nurse's first name was Mary, but the name of the book is A World of Hurt. And the picture on the front is a couple panels from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. So that's
And
good.
one more thing, my husband served during 66 to 68 as a Marine.
I'm sorry.
He also, he also spent about 30 years before he really admitted that he was a Marine and served there. Again, that feeling of not being accepted when he came back, just not knowing how to really deal with that. And we can thank Ted Grinley here for, he was a World War II veteran,
Oh, wow.
and he encouraged my husband to seek out the VA. And he's had such a great experience since then. And again, the welcome that he has now helps to make up for some of that time. But I too suffered with him
Oh,
as he was over there and when he came back.
There is another book out there written by one of the nurses. I'm trying to recall her name, and I apologize, it just won't come in, but it was called Home by Morning. And wow, what they went through, just unbelievable. One scene that she described was they were in surgery for like 56 straight hours. She was exhausted, and the first gurney available, she collapsed on it and slept for 12 straight hours. When she got up, she had trouble. She couldn't lift her hair up. That gurney was full of blood. She didn't even realize it. You know, God forgive me for not being able to remember her name, but it's Home by Morning. A lot of her situations from Vietnam were used in the television series about the nurses.
China Beach?
Beach, yeah. Many of her episodes were incorporated into the scenes in China Beach.
What's her name?
Nurse, the TV, her name was McMurphy, the nurse in China.
Yeah, McMurphy. And I don't know, somebody wanted to try to call up author Home by Morning. I'd feel a lot better about getting her name out there for you.
Was there another question? Yeah.
There is. I hope you have time to answer it. Thank you all so very much. We all know this war was very different, right? Very different from almost every other war that and you can tell that by everybody who's been to the wall. The feeling that you get when you're at the wall is very different from what you get when you see the statue to Iwo Jima or any of the other monuments. It's very different. In fact, I had some Thai students who went to the wall and said they felt afraid because they felt that they were going to be identified as Vietnamese, and they were nervous that people would hold something against them. But just the whole sensation when you're at the wall is extremely different. Having said that, I'd like to know, thank you all for your service. What is your personal feeling about the war itself after having been there? I'm married to a Vietnam vet, and I know his feeling, but I'd like to know what you have to say about the war in general.
I guess the easiest way to describe it is we fought with our hands behind our back. I remember the first time we got an order that said, don't shoot unless you're shot at. Wait, what? You've been telling me for 8 weeks of basic or 13 weeks of infantry school that if I see the bad guy, shoot him, and shoot him now before he gets the chance to shoot at you. It was definitely a political war. There was just too much of that. If they would let us fight it, it would have been over in half the time. Curtis LeMay was a general at the Air Force, and he came up with, you give me 6 wings, tactical bomber wings, of B-52s, I'll end this thing for you in 6 months. The bad guys were coming down through Laos and Cambodia and coming in, we weren't allowed to go in there. And then I have to say, shortly after, my interpretation of it was, we were doing most of the fighting for the South Vietnamese. And with the exception of a few really elite units that we worked with them, that was pretty much true. And then after we got them all ready, we said, okay, it's all yours. And they turned coat and ran. Well, I found out that wasn't the case. And I hate to get political, but this is the way it happened. We told North Vietnam in the peace talks that we're going to pull out, but if you start any more trouble, we're going to support them. Well, they started coming into South Vietnam, and it went to Congress to appropriate money to give the South Vietnamese what they needed. And the Democratic Congress turned it down. So they had guns and no ammo. They had tanks and no fuel. They had planes and no bombs. They gave up, and I can't say as I blame them. There's no way that they could fight as civilians almost against a military like that, backed by Russia and China. So yeah, if they would let us fight it.
My experience before I got my notice when I was in school was the most avid anti-Vietnam War people that I've ever met were Marines and Green Berets that came out of Vietnam. That was because of the way the war was prosecuted, because of the political nature of it, they didn't want anybody else to go. I did not want anybody else to go after I went there. So the most avid were Vietnam veterans. And I think that's generally true.
Tom?
I think of Ronald Reagan was the first president after the Vietnam War was done. He came out and he actually said that no matter what you feel about the Vietnam War, it was a noble cause. And I think that helped a lot of veterans kind of start to come out of the shell. Okay, President said this. Maybe I can go talk to somebody. Maybe I can go get help. Maybe I shouldn't have this anger inside of me. Just, let me try to improve my life. That's something that, that kind of stayed with me to this day.
The TV show MASH, right?
Yes.
Which was about the Korean War, but not really about the Korean War.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a line in there where I think Hawkeye is doing surgery and he's talking to Padre, and he says, "What's worse, hell or war?" And he goes, "Well, hell." He goes, "Well, why do you say that?" He goes, and Hawkeye goes, "Who goes to hell?" And he goes, "Those people that deserve to go to hell." That's right. Who dies in war? Everybody dies in war. War is worse than hell, because even the innocent and those that don't deserve to die end up feeling the consequences of a war. And that's regardless. And I'll tell you that when I was in Iraq, the whole rules, if they shoot, don't shoot them. A lot of that was...
Really?
Yeah, it was like you have to be able to identify the actual shooter. And if you hit someone that's not the shooter, then you're going to be in legal trouble. Which, when you tell someone that, really makes you scared to shoot.
And that can get you killed.
Yes. So, go ahead.
thanks to all of you for being here, especially Snoopy saying about Sharon Lane. As soon as you said Canton, Ohio, I'm from Canton, Ohio, and Altman Hospital actually has a statue of her. So I looked online just to see, and it says, in 1973, a statue of Lane was dedicated in front of Altman Hospital. And in 1986, the hospital opened the Sharon Lane Women's Center, and the statue's in the lobby. She was a first lieutenant when she died, so thanks. And then the other was about my husband. We were 1970 Heidelberg College graduates, and I think it was in January they had the draft, and everybody went down to the bars, to see what their number was going to be. Now, Dave was lucky that his was like 216, so he didn't have to go. But as far as feeling guilty, back then it was if you were drafted, you went. You didn't have a choice.
A couple things as we close. If I've been doing veterans issues for 15 years, so if any of you have questions about veteran benefits or anything like this, either I can tell you I might know the answer, but if I don't, I know a person that does know the answer, right? So if you have questions on that, let me know. The other thing is you'll see Tom wearing an Honor Flight Cleveland hat and Snoopy wearing an Honor Flight Cleveland shirt. Snoopy and I are part of Honor Flight Cleveland. We are now moving into taking Vietnam veterans on the flights. So if you want to talk about that, let Snoopy or I know, and we can tell you how to sign up. Just to let you know, at any given time, we have about, right now we're at 275, 280 wait list, and we're doing about, we're doing about 200 plus a year around about on the flights. So you got to realize if you sign up now, you're not going to fly this year, or next year you're probably flying 26. If you do get a diagnosis, though, that is terminal, and don't be the guy that called me up and said, I'm living, therefore I'm terminal.
Sounds like something Snoopy would say.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? I'm living, therefore I'm terminal. But yeah, if you come down with a terminal illness, or an illness where you can walk or get around fine now, but next year not so much, please let us know. And I want to say this, because this gets back to the question you asked. This is not just for Vietnam vets. This is for Vietnam and Vietnam era vets. So if you want to go, let us know, and we can get you on the list. Who are you?
I'm the daughter that got mentioned. About the books that you asked about, there is a Vietnamese American who wrote a fictional book called The Sympathizer. He's a double agent. I'm trying to get through it right now, but it might be something you want to check out. And second, everyone else who talked about the women. First of all, thank you all for your service. I know the answer to this for you, but would love to hear from the others. And Snoopy, I know your answer too, but if you could speak a little bit on if you've been back to Vietnam, if you are interested in going, and if you're not, if you're comfortable sharing why you're not, why you would go, why you wouldn't go. Just curious on that.
He's up.
Oh,
Would you want to go back?
no. I don't have good memories of Vietnam. Not one. I mean, the only good memory I had is the Mars call, right? When I heard that I had a baby, and now I had 10 months to still be there and not be able to see my daughter. My daughter, when she was stationed with her husband in Okinawa, did go to Vietnam. And she tells me it's a beautiful country, but I have no desire. I just don't have good memories.
I have to agree on that. It is a beautiful country. We spent 2 nights in an area that had a Buddhist temple and a palace there. And I don't know if it's true, but at one time that whole area was Siam. And supposedly this was the summer palace of the king and queen of Siam, and it was gorgeous. But no, I don't want to go back there. The the only good memory I have on there is when Captain Anderson said, "Welcome to Saturn Flight, whatever it was, bound for the continental United States. Gentlemen, let's get the hell out of here." Hit the thrusters.
And Tom, you've been there.
Yeah. My daughter came up to me one day and said, "Dad, you're going to Vietnam, you got no choice." And
Hey, she runs the government.
yeah.
That's just like a draft.
And what happens is she works for a company, I believe they're called Ingenious. And well, yeah, I always, the first time there in a uniform, you're there because somebody ordered you there, okay? It's not because, oh yeah, I want to go there, get me there quick. And, I wanted to go back because I just wanted to try to relate to people. No uniforms, no nothing, just people. And so she was there we went there for 2 weeks. 1 week was work for her, the other week was vacation. And I got to meet a lot of people. And they spoke English pretty darn good. Many of them, I would say, were absolutely kind. They made me feel welcomed. One girl gave me an idea of what she wants to do with her life. She might have been maybe 20, and she was a bartender in one of the hotels that we had stayed at. And so I just struck up a conversation with her, and she said, she says, right now I'm working 3 jobs, I'm living at home, and I'm trying to work my way up into a better job each time. And maybe there'll come a time when I don't need to work 3 jobs, where I'll get 1 job and still go to college too. And I'm thinking, I still to this day, I have never had a conversation like that with any young person around the area in which we live. And it's like, that is different. Also, I found that the family bonds over there, they're unbelievable. They don't have rest homes. As you get older, your family takes care of you and sees to you right through to the very end. Yes, sometimes they live in overcrowded conditions, and sometimes I'm sure there's some that rebel and say, heck with this, I'm going out. But I saw more of that in Vietnam than I've seen here in the States. And it's like, that's interesting. Maybe there are some things to learn even from a place that was once the horror of Vietnam.
It's funny because though I served in Iraq, I've actually been to Vietnam. And so I went in 2006, and it was very interesting. It was the first time in my life I got to learn American history from the perspective of not an American. And it's they prominently put right out in front, when you start talking about military history, the massacre at My Lai. That's like front and center. They want everyone to know that this is how bad these Americans were, right? They showed us there was how they built booby traps, how they had tunnels that you could still crawl through. It was extremely interesting to see how you look at American history from a different perspective. And I got introduced as a soldier of the United States Army, in which I was I was a veteran at the point. I wasn't in the military. But I shook the hands of people who fought on the other side. And he told me, and I said, well, how are there a lot? He goes, no, like a lot of the Vietnam veterans that fought on the side of the North were killed soon after the war, or they were not given treatment. So by 2006, the opportunity to meet a Vietnam veteran that fought on the side of the North was very few and far between. So it's interesting to see how American history is perceived from another side. and it kind of taught me like there's two sides to every story. And I think in order to understand the whole purpose of history is to look at it from both sides, not necessarily from just one dogmatic side, but from the other, because then you start getting the whole picture. And the whole purpose of studying history, if you look at your history and you're like, oh, we did everything right every single time,
Oh, no.
that's not history. You're learning propaganda. And to learn from the mistakes that people have made and how they made them and why they made them is very informative. So I just wanted to share that because it's sort of a rare thing.
Well, it's true. The lady from Canton, Lieutenant Lane's outfit came out of Fort Carson, Colorado. There is a highway out there. It's got a big sign on it that says Sharon Lane Way. She also has a bench at the Ohio Veterans Memorial Park in Clinton, Ohio, which has a huge wall with the names of everybody from Ohio that was killed in Vietnam, and I believe they added Korea. They even have a Gold Star mother and a Gold Star father statue. And Sharon Lane's name is on panel 23 West at the wall, line 112. It's about this far off the bottom. Being with the honor flight for so long, every June flight we went, or July, because she was killed July 9th, we've left something with her name or her picture on it. I've left a teddy bear with Honor Flight Cleveland tag on it. Left a ceramic angel. Sometimes we leave flowers. But we always make sure that everybody knows that there's a Buckeye on that wall. Also, she's in the Women in Military History Museum at the entrance to Arlington. So
Yeah.
she's been honored in a lot of places. And she earned it.
Any other questions? I know we've blown past time, and I appreciate that. But if nothing else, let's give a hand. And if the Vietnam vets and the Vietnam era vets come up so we can shake their hands, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. And tomorrow is Modern Veterans, so my generation of veterans. Yeah, so.
The door kickers.
The door kickers, that's right.
Hello, can I have your attention, please? The name of the nurse who wrote the book Home Before Morning was Linda Van Devanter. Thank you.